Hi everyone, I'm Maria from the H&M Group, here today to show you some examples of alternatives assessment and the tools for this that we're using at H&M Group. First, I will put our approach to alternatives assessment in the context of our chemical roadmap and add the historical perspective to how we got started on this work. Then I'll briefly go into our choice of methodology to move along to our main tools of choice to show you in more detail how it all works in practice. I will also go into how we're looking at it for the future. So here's a brief overview of our chemical roadmap, and what I want you to bring with you here is mainly the best available chemistries, which at large relies on sound alternatives assessment, is one of our prioritized working areas. Of course, it's not the only prioritized working area we have, and it doesn't exist in a vacuum. You have to get, for example, traceability in order to really make best available chemistries work. So, putting alternatives assessment into an historical context, here you can see H&M Group's long history of chemical restrictions dating back to 1995 and some of our major phase-out milestones. Starting early on by banning PVC from our products and continuing with perfluorinated substances, PFAS. More recently, the solvent dimethyl formamide, DMF, especially used in polyurethane fake leather products. I've especially highlighted the PFAS phase out here, and that's intentionally so because I will get back to that later on, as this was kind of the starting point of our work with alternatives assessment. And this is also really what led us to later join the ZDHC Safer Chemistry Task Team and work not only for safer alternatives assessment in phase-out projects, but to have safer chemistry throughout our supply chains as a whole. So looking into our phase out of PFAS and especially the substitution in that project. What we did was, because we don't own our production and we don't really have a say in the exact technical aspects and the economical aspects of every alternative. What we did was we wanted to make sure that our suppliers had a list or a pool of chemical products that they could choose from, depending on what suited their product and production best. So with that said, we created a positive list of water repellent alternatives, and this was also done from a perspective that these are in fact better alternatives than perfluorinated versions. So our positive lists for water repellent alternatives was based on the information that was available to us at the time from the safety data sheets of the products. However, what we often faced was what you can see here, especially on the right-hand side in section 3. The only information about ingredients we got was that it's a mixture, and the hazards identification is that it's not classified. But we felt that this positive list that we have is kind of a way of promoting these chemical products, and we started to realize that this level of information, basically not getting any information, is not okay for us when we're actually promoting something. So, and even if this is okay or correct from a REACH perspective or a GHS perspective, it's we still feel that it didn't give us the level of certainty that we wanted about perhaps future classifications, etc., about the substances in the formulation. So this led us to narrow down our criteria for what a safer alternative would be and what we would need to judge a safer alternative. Well, we would need a full material declaration, or to be more specific, actually full component assessment, and that meaning that not only substances above 1% or even 0.1% is essential, but even byproducts and substances that are there in lower amounts than that should be assessed. We also realized that we wanted the assessment to be done based on hazard and not risk. And this is not saying that exposure potential and the subsequent risk is of no interest to us. It's just saying that for the chemical product, we feel it's important to know the hazard. The exposure potential and subsequent risk is something for to be judged for every application, such as by the product supplier when they're using it in the factory, or by us, the brands who will be selling the product, and seeing does it still contain any of the substances that our customers will use and will be exposed to. That's the exposure potential we need to look at and take care of. With this said, I mean, having full material hazard assessment, that obviously would require some kind of data gap management as well, as Joel said previously. If you have these many substances as you would with a full material declaration, and looking at a hazard assessment for various endpoints, up 23 ones, then you will inevitably have data gaps as well. So there needs to be a way to score these and take these into account in a good way for the final score of the product. We also want the assessment to be done independently by third-party service providers. So these criteria pointed us towards green chemistry, which is a hazard assessment approach based on green screen by CPA, Clean Production Action. We accept versions of it by Cyvera and Tox Services, and also by other service providers. Looking into our safer chemistry tools then, well, we have Ferrous for individual substances when we know the CAS number and the exact substance that we're going to look at. We have Cyvera Lens Rapid Screen for full formulations where we may not know the contents. And we're also looking into using ZDHC Gateway, especially for the future. Starting with Ferrous, an excellent tool for single assessment overview. This slide is showing you an example of the list view. So here you see the restricted substances list and a positive list. And you can also click here more on to read more about them, and that way get a better understanding of the relevance of the list for your specific application. And then the other nice feature with Ferrous is that you get to see a green screen assessment or screen chemistry assessment as much as is available. And you get to see if it's green, yellow, or red for every hazard endpoint. In this case, we have one which is very green, pointing towards this being a good alternative. And this is in fact a substitute for a phthalate. So interesting to see. Now, when you look at chemical formulations, though, I mean, these are much more complex than when you're looking at just one substance. So this is why we're using Cyvera Rapid Screen. And as you can see here to the left, the actual substances here are in reducted format, so we don't have the CAS numbers and we don't have their common names. But we see the amounts they're in, and we also get a very full hazard view of each and every substance. The reason why it's in redacted format here is because this is an actual water repellent chemical product that the chemical supplier has added to the system, and then via Cyvera, whose toxicologists have looked at this as at the composition and and added all the information here, they sent it over to us in a redacted format, so we don't have to take into account any proprietary information. We can just see the hazards and the hazard assessment, which is what we're interested in. It's also a good idea to note here that the level of detail that we get for every chemical product, and of course this level of detail is not something we can or want to take into account when looking at at more general substitutions, or when looking at using better chemistries in our supply chain in general. Then what we would need is something that gives us a better overview of these products are better alternatives, these products are safer, meaning that they would have the yellow or green score in screen chemistry or green screen. So that would respond more to our positive list. So for that reason, I think it's really interesting to have a look at the ZDHC Gateway, which today is a database where you can find MRSL compliant chemistry, compliant to ZDHC MRSL, of course. And this is something that the suppliers are already using today to pick and choose the MRSL compliant chemistry and products. But what we're hoping is that in the future, this will be a proper safer chemistry gateway, a safer chemistry database where suppliers actually get even truly safe alternatives. So let's have a look at how it looks today. If you want to go in and look at screen chemistry inside the HG Gateway, it's actually possible already, but it's a bit tricky. So you see, what you have to do today is first you got to choose the actual kind of use type you want, right? So in this case, we're still looking at fluorine-free water repellents. And then you got to click in the certification standard. So in this case, I clicked in the screen chemistry from Cyvera Lens, and that is passed. And then you get the alternatives. However, if I was, for example, looking at TOC services instead, then I have to click in another box. So it would be easier if there were just like one filter for safer chemistry or screen chemistry alternatives here. But as of yet, there isn't none. And also, of course, what we're aiming for is that Gateway becomes a safer chemistry database in full. However, to get there, this would also require consensus across the industry, from the chemical suppliers via the product suppliers to us brands, about what safer chemistry and safe alternatives really are. And this is what we're driving in the HG Safer Chemistry Task Team, but also what we're looking at for our other products group than textile and leather. Yeah, this is the big thing that really needs to be solved for us within the upcoming years. Thank you. That was all. Hope it was interesting to you guys.